Today, I want to propose the thesis that AI investment is killing the PC industry. So to understand this, we're going to have to look and see what the PC industry is and what its size is. And this chart gives us an idea. So this is not every single computer that's sold, but it is the vast majority. It considers the global market of laptops, tablets, and desktop PCs. It doesn't consider phones and microwaves and all of this, but laptops, tablets, and desktop PCs are the vast majority of compute that is used to run actual businesses and gaming. And so if we look for the year, which would be 2025, for which we have actual numbers, we see that the size of the entire computer industry is around $226 billion. So when we talk about the PC market, that is essentially what we're talking about, something that is approximately $226 billion in size. Now, there are only 3 companies in the world that make state-of-the-art chips for, say, GPUs and CPUs, and those companies are TSMC, Samsung, and Intel. There are also only 3 companies in the world that make state-of-the-art RAM chips, and that is Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron. So the question is, what happens if someone buys up all chips, right? What if somebody bought all chips, right? For RAM, CPUs, GPUs, SSDs, everything, right? What would happen if someone did that? Well, what would that do to the PC market? Well, it would kill the entire PC market, right? Imagine if somebody bought up all the food, right? Imagine there were only, say, 3 companies in the world that had farms, and you went to those companies and you say, hey, I want to buy all the food that you produce, every single bit. What would that do to supermarkets, to restaurants, to fast food places? Basically, they would all disappear from the earth, right? Because there's no food to sell, so they would have to fire everyone and close down the buildings. The same thing would happen to the PC market, right? If every single chip was bought up, then all the manufacturers for all PC components, including fans and the GPU, the RAM sticks, the GPUs that you put into your computer, the motherboards, the cases, everything, the thermal paste, all those companies would have to close. Additionally, if you bought up every single chip that exists on the planet, you would run into you would essentially destroy the entire economy of Earth. And the reason for that is essentially all businesses require computers to operate. And we need the internet, right, to send emails and communicate. We need computer chips. There's around 300 computer chips in every single car. Banks use computers, right? No, there is no bank that just does things by hand on paper with pencil. No, they all use computers, and they're all networked together. And what would happen is if you have ordinary data centers, which there are many data centers all over the planet with millions of computers. Well, if you have large data centers, not AI data centers, these are just ordinary data centers. If you have millions of computers, well, guess what? There's going to be components that fail all the time. There's going to be components that get too old and need to be replaced all the time. And in fact, if you have millions or tens of millions of computers, that means you're going to need at least thousands of components per month, a river of components going in to replace the old and failing components for these data centers. So if somebody bought all chips on Earth, then those ordinary data centers would not be able to replace failing components, which means websites would start to go offline. The services that you rely on that have lots of computers, such as Google and Netflix and everything else, well, they would start to fail. Like certain regions would just lose their capacity to serve, videos or do email, because guess what? Those data centers just start going offline. So, and if all of that stuff goes offline, eventually you would have lots of people, billions of people dead, because you can't have an economy without computers. Every single business, even if your business, you say, oh, well, I don't use computers at all. Well, do you have a bank account? Well, then you use computers. And the thing is even if you don't have a bank account and you survive just on cash, guess what? How does anyone else live off on cash? How do they have cash? Well, they have jobs, which have banks. And so if you kill off computers, you kill off the entire economy and you kill billions of people. So that's what would happen. And of course, like as this says here, no more phones, no more gaming, no more banks, no more electricity. All of these things require computers to run, to provide to other people. And if you think about it, that's what AI and the AI investment is doing to the PC industry. They're buying up, not every single chip, but they're buying up a majority of chips. And that's causing big problems. In fact, we've got a headline here that says that 70% of all high-end memory chips in 2026 are bought for AI data centers. So think about this, that essentially 70% of all RAM, this is a little bit simplified, but 70% of all RAM is bought for AI data centers, and the rest of Earth only gets that small sliver of 30% to buy ordinary computers. So that's why RAM is 10 times the price that it should be. And that's why SSDs are double or triple what they should be. And that's why all these other components are rising in price. And this has a tremendous impact on the PC industry. Gamers Nexus did a 3.5-hour documentary not too long ago where they interviewed a bunch of different other companies and asked them how they were doing. And these were manufacturers of thermal paste, of coolers, cases, everything you would think of that you would need to build a computer. And all of these companies said that their revenue was down something like 50 to 70% over the previous year. And this is insane. Imagine if you lost over half of your salary. Would you be able to continue to pay your rent, to pay your bills, and survive? Most people would not. And these companies are having to tighten down the hatches, right? They have to fire some people. They're having to perform some very extreme measures to try to be as efficient as possible to try to survive. And basically what they're doing is they're trying to wait things out. They're hoping that the AI data centers will not buy so many things so prices can return somewhat to normal. And even the manufacturers of the RAM sticks that you buy, say for G.Skill, like those guys don't actually make the chips. They have to buy the chips from one of the three companies I talked about before. They have to buy those chips, then they make the actual sticks of RAM that you buy. So G.Skill is essentially making very little money. In fact, because people aren't building computers or buying as many computers, they're actually making far less money. So even the people who sell RAM are kind of losing their business. So what is the plan behind all of these companies that are building the AI data centers, such as NVIDIA and other companies that are selling AI? The idea is that you won't have a computer. You will have what's called a thin client. Now, maybe unless you're very into the computer world, you probably don't know what a thin client is. But a thin client is essentially a computer that can connect to keyboard, mouse, and a monitor, and it can't really do anything. Essentially, a thin client uses a network connection to connect to a real computer, and that's where all the storage, all the compute, and everything else happens. And that's essentially the idea behind what all of these AI investors want to happen. They want the PC industry to die so they can sell you a thin client. And that means that in order to have any real computation capacity, you have to get a subscription So you will have some sort of virtual machine in the cloud, and that's where all of your storage is. That's where all of your computation happens. So all gaming, all storage, everything happens in the cloud, and your local computer can't do anything. It can't store anything. It can't really compute anything. It just shows your screen of whatever the virtual computer that you're subscribed to. And that's essentially the idea of what they're going to have. In fact, NVIDIA even has ideas of you're going to have these data centers that'll be put inside your neighborhood, where there'll be these, supercomputers that are just like little boxes that are put in every person's neighborhood, and you'll just subscribe to their little local data center, right? And so that's essentially the idea. Like you won't really be able to own a real computer anymore. Everything will be by subscription. And that means there is no privacy and no ownership. So if you're trying to do your taxes, they can see all of your data, right? Which means they have access to everything that you say, everything that you do. If you have test results for like a medical issue that happens, they can see those test results, right? They know your medical history now. It's a serious issue. So I don't have a problem with companies experimenting with AI. It's like, hey, we want to build models. We want to test these things. We want to try to build an awesome AI that works and does things for people. I don't have a problem with that. But what I do have a problem with is them buying up the entire computer industry and destroying it, right? This is a national security issue. This is a global security issue. They could potentially destroy the entire economy. And think about this. Back at the beginning of this presentation, what did I say was the size of the computer industry? Around $226 billion, right? For the entire computer industry. Well, the amount of money that's going to be spent on AI investment just this year is expected to be something like $750 billion. So they have enough money that they could just buy every possible chip in existence. And it would just screw everything over. Now, I know that they can't quite do that because they know that would just destroy the entire Earth, and they can't do that yet. But they have the money to just spend and destroy the economy if they wanted to. So, how do we solve this? Well, there's an infinite number of solutions that you could have. I'm just going to list a couple here. Like the federal government, the United States government could say, hey, this is a national security issue. You can't just threaten the entire global economy by just saying, oh, I'm just going to buy all the chips. And we're going to limit how many chips are bought for AI, right? I wouldn't recommend that. I think that's probably, you don't want to go down that path of governmental control over the economy, even though technically the government has, the federal government can control international commerce, right? But I think the better way of dealing with this is thinking of this as scalping, right? And companies have had to deal with scalpers for decades. And if you look at what Valve is doing with the Steam Machine, I think they have a brilliant idea. What they're doing is, instead of first come, first served, which is really good for scalpers, what they're doing is you put your name on a list of saying, hey, I'm interested in the Steam Machine. And then what Valve is doing is they're randomly picking from that list and saying, oh, here you go, you can order a Steam Machine. And so as they have Steam Machines available, they'll pick random people from the interest list. And this allows ordinary people that are interested to buy the Steam Machine. You could imagine this same kind of thing for computer chips, where these manufacturers of RAM and GPUs and so forth could bundle these things together into blocks and saying, okay, for this certain SKU of CPUs, we're going to sell them in blocks of, say, 5 or 10,000 or whatever makes sense. And you have different companies put in bids for these things. And then you randomly choose from those companies and say, okay, here, you get a block of 10,000, right? And you choose another one, you get a block of 10,000. So instead of a company coming to the manufacturer and saying, I just want to buy, 70% of your output, and they just outbid everybody, you just have these essentially kind of a raffle where you have a bunch of companies that are interested, and you randomly pick, and they get blocks of chips allocated to them. So this would allow a much more fair distribution, and it would also protect the world and consumers from shocks in demand, right? So if there suddenly are a bunch more companies that are interested in buying a certain kind of chip, well, they get a certain allotment. They can't just go and buy them all. They can buy certain blocks if they're randomly selected. So I think that's a much more fair way of doing it. It prevents scalping, and you don't need super draconian measures, from a government to control these things. So that's one possible solution. But I think this is what we need to do, is we need to start talking about this, saying that, hey, this actually is a problem. It could cause severe economic issues. I mean, I essentially talked about the worst case issue where it would collapse the entire economy, right? If you buy up all chips, it would just destroy everything. I don't think that's going to happen, but you could see how, they could buy enough that it collapses the PC industry, and then they'll say, oh, well, guess what? You have no choice. You have to buy these thin clients, right? They could essentially gain control over the economy just by throwing around a lot of money. And I think that's a severe issue. It essentially destroys the ability for average people to have a voice in society. So that is the issue that I wanted to bring up. Those are a couple solutions I came up with. That's basically all I wanted to talk about today. And, in the future, I'll just have more technical things. And of course, I've got a bunch of other things to say about AI and kind of elucidating like what these things are and how they're used. But that's for another time. So hopefully you have a great day, and let's start talking about how to protect the PC industry. Until next time.